Welcome back. We are still in Texas T, working with multiple representations, graphs, tables, equations. And in this problem, activity 3.4, this time we are starting with a graph to then go from the graph to fill in a table and then to answer questions and make sense of this problem. So let's get started. It says this graph shows the relationship between two quantities. And we don't know what those two quantities are because look at the axis. Are they labeled? No. Look at our table. Is that labeled? No. We simply see independent variable and dependent variable, meaning that variable is dependent on what our independent variable is. Also, a good practice for me, I personally just like to go ahead and label that X because X is our independent variable and Y is our dependent. That's going to help us make sense of this and fill in this table. So let's look at what we have. Already in the table filled in for us is 0, 80, which we can identify on our graph right here, 0, 80. All we have to do now is fill in the rest of these values. So I'm going to randomly pick one so that you can see how you're going to fill this in because I'm going to have you guys do this on your own. So I'm looking at my 10 on the x-axis. So I want to choose this point here. And also this does not have to be in any order right now because you know what? I'm going to be honest. I'm taking that back. I actually do want to go in order because that is a good practice and it's going to help us make sense of our numbers. So I apologize. I don't know where I was going with that. So I'm going to actually start with the next value to the right next to our 080, which on my x-axis, I can see it's right here. Each interval looks like it represents 1. So that's a 1 on my x-axis. Whoa, 1. And then on my y-axis, it is right here in between 70 and 80. And I know that number is 75. So I'm going to write 75 in my y column, in the dependent variable column. And that is how you would identify those points to then put into a table. And you will do the same for the numbers on the negative side of this x-axis as well. Don't forget about those. Don't be afraid of those negative numbers. So now you're going to fill in this table and then also complete these questions. So number 1, of course, says complete the table using the graph. I just said that. Number 2 says write an equation for the relationship. So just like we did in the last activity, you're looking for the pattern. Starting from your starting point, what happens every time I increase by 1? To find your unit rate, let me write that. That is important. You're finding your unit rate, and that is what you're going to use to fill in your table. And then number 3, you're writing a problem situation that can be represented by this graph, the table, and the equation. Explain what the unit rate means in context. So you're explaining what is happening in this problem and what could that be representing in the real world. So at this time, you are completing questions 1, 2, and 3. Filling in this table, I will leave this example here while you are paused. Set your timer for about, let's say 8 minutes. 8 total minutes to complete all 3 questions. Pause here. Alrighty, now that you've had time to work, let's review our answers. So within your table, look at my table. Those are all of the values that are plotted on that graph. At 2, it lands at 270. At 3, it's 365. And at 10, you've got 1030. And if I want to find, let me back up. These are the values that you should have gotten in your table. You also could have, and let me just show you something. If it asks for an additional point, you also could have looked at any point on this line and mark that. So if I mark this point where I see that this point crosses through that intersection right there, I could also, if I wanted to, label that point as well. That would be 650. 650. Just letting you know. Moving forward, your equation that you should have gotten. So your equation, it starts at 80. Your graph starts at 80 on the y-axis. So when x is 0, your y is at 80. That's our starting point. And then notice in our table, you can see the pattern. I'm subtracting 5 for every minute. So I'm looking at my minutes 1, 2, 3 right here because that's the easiest. And I can see that, oh, actually, let me back up. 0, 1, 2, 3. And I can see that from 80, I subtracted 5. From 75 to 70, that's again a -5 difference. 70 to 65, we subtracted 5. So I know that is my unit rate. So -5 times x, and x being our independent variable. So for every 1 increase on the x-axis, there was a 5 decrease, 5 increment. Sure, 5 unit. There we go. Okay. It's hard when you don't have labels to these numbers. A 5 unit decrease. And then number 3, it said write a problem situation that can be represented by this graph, table, and equation. So for this, you may have had different answers, and that's okay. But you could have said something like, and I'll just give an example. Tommy has $80, and every week or every day, something more realistic, every day he spends $5 at the snack bar after school. And so this shows us on day 1 or on day 0, Tommy started with $80. And then on day 1, he spent 5. So now at $75. On day 2, he spent 5. So now he's at $70. On day 3, he spent 5. So he's at $65. All the way to day 10, he's going to be then down to $30. So if you said something along the lines of that shows that pattern, then you are on the right track, and it shows that you understand how to read multiple representations, those being the graph, the table, and the equation. Alrighty, great work today in this activity. That concludes activity 3.4, and I will see you in the next video.